And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new On Location Chats on the Road episode here with Sean Martin. I'm flying solo for this. Marco, my co-founder, is back in the States, and I get the joy of covering OWASP AppSec Global in Lisbon. It's going to be a fun event. I've missed the AppSec community, DevOps, DevSecOps, and the like, and I get to dig deep back into my past when I once was an engineer back in the day, and it's always fun. I miss it. I couldn't do it, I don't think, anymore. There's too much going on for me to keep track of it all. That's why I'm thrilled to have folks like Kim and Avi on to help share some knowledge with the community about things that are taking place. And privacy is a training session that you're going to be presenting, and it caught my attention. I said, I want to talk about this as we lead up to the event. So I'm thrilled to have you both on. How about we kick it off with a word from each of you, your role, what you're up to, and maybe just a quick word on why privacy is important to you.
Okay,
Kim,
happy to start. I'm Kim Wuyts. I am a cyber and privacy manager at PwC in Belgium. And I have a long history of being a privacy engineering researcher where I mainly focused on privacy threat modeling and the Linden privacy threat modeling framework. Why privacy is important, I kind of rolled into it. I started as a security researcher and then got into contact with privacy people and realized, well, this is not just interesting, this is really important. And it can also actually strengthen security. So it has this nice interplay between GRC legal stuff, technology, ethics. So I think it's a really interesting domain and it's really important. So.
And a lot of cultural differences as well. Funny enough.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Avi.
I'm Avi Douglen, lead consulting at a small boutique called Bounce Security. We focus on product security processes. I spend a lot of time doing things like threat modeling. That's kind of how I first originally met Kim when we were working on the threat modeling manifesto together. Doing threat modeling, I always covered privacy. Sure, we have confidentiality. We manage the cookies. We have that. And I very quickly got educated hard about that privacy is actually a lot more than that. And I went through, Kim had me go through this whole process of learning all that stuff. And that's when I realized, wow, this is actually really, really useful for me as a product security engineer and a consultant. And this is where this idea for this training came from. We wanted to share this with other security engineers, other product security and apps people that realize they can actually leverage so much more when they understand the nuances and the intricacies and the different things that privacy actually means.
Well, let me do this to kick it off. It's been a few years now that I had this revelation as some laws were coming into play, GDPR, of course, a number of years back, that when we talk about confidentiality and security, it's really about keeping things private. And the revelation I had with respect to privacy is that it's all about using data when possible. I guess, I don't know if I can say it correctly. I guess the point is it's you want, in privacy, you want the data, you want to keep it private, but you need to have access and use it in many different ways. So somebody who's in privacy may not always jive, or the policies in privacy may not always jive with the policies in security.
Well, first of all, I think there's this private has been used in different ways indeed. So if you look at it from the security perspective, you're right. We want to keep things private, meaning we want to keep our assets that we care about. We want to keep it private from external bad guys. From a privacy perspective, what we mean then with private, although I don't like the word private from a privacy perspective, it's more like, even though you collect my data, I want you to use it with care. Only use it for the purposes that you are allowed to use it for. Don't share it with other people. even though from a company perspective, you might think, well, this is okay. From a privacy perspective, you need to think of it not from the company perspective, but from the personal perspective. Would that individual be okay with it? So it's a bit of a different mindset. And well, there might be some differences between the two things, but I don't think it's ever very that conflicting that you can't resolve it. I think it's important that you tackle them together, and then you can find this solution that works for both. But if you start from, here is a secure system, and then let's sprinkle some privacy on top, of course, it's going to clash.
And this is always the same thing that we had, if you first build a system and then sprinkle security on top, that's not going to work either. It's going to clash with functionality. I feel like it's a lot of the same conversation that we had previously in security. We're preaching, no, we need to be involved at the beginning and then ignore privacy. We need to be involved, but never actually got privacy involved in that conversation. And now we are having that from the other direction.
So have developers, engineers, have they kind of embraced the idea of building with privacy by design from the beginning? Or what's kind of the current mindset there?
We're working on that. No.
Not enough.
Yeah, no, not enough. Well, I think security people will even say that they haven't embraced security enough. So I think for privacy, we're even lagging behind a bit there. But that's the interesting thing of the whole privacy journey, because privacy has a lot of similarities with security. It has kind of the same foundation. The way to tackle it, the way to bring it into the system is very, very similar. So rather than considering it in isolation, let's use that paved road that has been built for security already and just attach the privacy concepts there too. It's already there. We know how to do it properly for security. You probably already have this whole security practice working. So let's figure out how to, add privacy on top of that instead of making it a whole new domain that needs a whole new way of being implemented.
So one of the things many moons ago, I was a quality assurance engineer where I did basically AppSec before it was called AppSec, I guess, testing functions and APIs and a bunch of different things. And being rooted in quality assurance, my background was all around user stories. So what do we expect the experience to be like? What do we expect the product to do in different situations? What can we expect it not to do? And then from inside, can we verify that functions would be called properly and data would be retrieved and accessed properly and all that stuff? Does the world of privacy leverage user stories and use cases and things like that as well? Or describe to me how teams could look at this. As
I said before, it's kind of very similar to the security part. You have two different angles to look at privacy. You have the more legal angle, where it's more the checkbox compliance kind of thing. So I'm not talking about that one. But if we're talking about privacy engineering, then it's very similar. There's privacy red teams. There's privacy requirements. There's all the things you would expect for security to also be there for privacy. It's a bit trickier as your requirements come from what you expect the individuals will want. So you also need to take that into consideration rather than just focusing on, from our company perspective, this is the goal. So that requires a bit of a mind shift from the people executing it, but also from management, because to do it properly, you actually need buy-in and you need to have people understand that privacy is important. But I like to say that you can start small, and if you just include the one question when you're adding a new feature or building a new product, and that question is, do I really need all these data? Then I think you're already a great way to starting implementing privacy.
Look, at a certain level of abstraction, they're pretty much the same thing when you replace who the stakeholder is. right? A certain level of abstraction security is protecting what's important, right? Protecting the value that is moving in that system. And it's gotten to the point where in my practice, I've gone so lightweight. I call this value-driven security, and just focus on just one value, and we can embed that in the user story. Every user story has a value. We focus on that. And if you replace, what the value is to the business or the different stakeholders, and you replace that with, well, let's talk about that individual and what the value is to that individual. Well, we're still just trying to protect the value to that stakeholder, and we're just pivoting around that and looking for the value chain that applies to that individual, right? And we're looking for different ways to protect that. And I don't know if we need to get to the resolution of a user story, but a feature set, right? A specific set of functionality. In our training, we focus on, we have a whole module around decomposing, taking a functionality and understanding how that applies and where the value is to that individual. And based on that, we can understand, well, these are the things that we need to protect. So it's so similar, right? But yet so different because it's different language. The business owns the application. The business controls the data, right? And the poor little individual is sitting there and sending their data to the system. And, I have no control. I have no say, except that you do.
Yeah. And okay. Go ahead.
No, please, Kim. No.
I wanted to stress that it's not just something you do because you want to do good, but you do that because you give value to the individual, to the users, and that makes your application more valuable and more interesting to the users, and improves the overall value. And also by investing in privacy, you also increase the let's say security posture. For one thing, if you minimize data because you don't really need it, that's already data that cannot be leaked when there is a security breach. So that's the obvious one. So privacy is not the confidentiality part of security. Privacy is really about data minimization, about making sure that when you have a lot of information, you aggregate it, you make sure it cannot be re-identified. When you assume it's de-identified, it's also about transparency, about providing controls to the individuals. So it goes far beyond security, while security is still a very important part, because of course, without encryption and access control, we just throw all the data on the street and then, we're lost basically.
So you mentioned just even de-identified and then re-identified. Just that is a concept that wouldn't be a security concept necessarily, right? And so I'm wondering, are there other things like that, including that one, that really needs to come to the forefront? And I guess what I'm really asking is that there's a lot of apps and tools available to look for the OWASP top 10 now, even with the LLM top 10, right? Is there a privacy top 10? I'm just wondering.
I actually think there is one in OWASP, but I think it's focused on web or something. I don't know. I think that would be an interesting one to work on. I will put it on my to-do list to work on that. I think it's really interesting to have this generic top 10 for privacy. Minimization is the first one. Like not being that company that says, let's just collect it and save it just in case. Because, maybe you just can't, or maybe you shouldn't at least. An interesting one is, I think, dark patterns is also an interesting one that we're familiar with, like being nudged into going for less privacy-friendly options because companies make it like a sneaky banner or something and they hide the information. I'm looking at Avi because, we don't have a top 10 now, so I don't know yet.
So, Sean, you actually started your question asking about things like de-identification, which I'm sure with your background as history, that kind of tripped you up, right? We want identification. That's a good thing, right? Another great one, by the way, is non-repudiation. That's right there. You do threat modeling, you do STRIDE. Repudiation is a threat. And from a privacy perspective, when you look at it from the individual perspective, that's a value. You want to be able to repudiate. You want to be able to claim, no, I don't have an account on that site, right? No, I did not send that message. So it's competing forces. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict here. It just means you need to balance this. And that's what architecture really is about, balancing competing forces and finding appropriate trade-offs, right? Even just, forget security even and privacy, even just building functionality, you always have competing forces that you need to balance when it comes to things like identification versus de-identification, repudiation versus non-repudiation. We have competing forces that we need to account for and balance. And again, it's what the company, what the business, what the site, the application values versus what the individual values. And we can absolutely find that balance if we start early enough and integrate them and have that cohesive view of, these are the things that I need to balance. Let's find the way to find that trade-off, as opposed to let's build it and then figure out all the problems later.
Yeah. Authentication is not a synonym for identification. It can help, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. You can find other ways too.
And one of the things you noted in the topics you list, you reference architectural data mapping, and I'm gonna focus on kind of the architecture, because if a team is mature in how they build and they care about security in their development process, they're probably going to architect and select components that support the security aspects of their program while also enabling the business piece of it.
One would hope.
One would hope, exactly. So my question is, are there architectural best practices to select the right components and configure them, connect them in the right way for privacy? And if so, are there any examples you can give for teams that do that well?
So I'm going to let Kim follow up, because she's probably going to tell me I'm wrong about this. But from my perspective, listen, the first big step, and I see this even from the security side, the biggest, and I'll talk about bad practice for a second, the biggest mistake I see most teams have is that they don't know what their architecture is. They never actually went in and built it well-defined. Oh, our architecture is web APIs and REST and a database. Well, that's not enough to define the architecture. What are the pieces? What are the interactions? What are the different various aspects of that? And that's the first thing. And that's the first thing we're going to be focusing on, is how to understand what the architecture actually is before we get into what you should be doing, right? And there are certain things that we're going to get to. I don't think there's anything I would say that is generic other than data minimization. I don't think there are any real patterns that are absolutely generic. And Kim, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Well, there are privacy design patterns, but they often are not necessarily on the architectural level. It's more conceptual things to include there. Maybe what is worth mentioning is that the concept of data needs a bit more of a granular approach when you are thinking about privacy, because, well, for security, it's often enough to just think of this blob of information you want to protect and encrypt and I don't know what. But from a privacy perspective, it makes sense to also think of, what does this actually mean? Is there meta information that will reveal additional things? Reason about, well, is it really de-identified because you claim it, but maybe it's not? Or what additional information can be deduced? What profiles can be built on an individual because you have all this information? So what does it mean, basically?
Yeah, because there's all these different correlations, for example, right? There's different ways of deducting different pieces of information simply by saying, okay, here's a blob of data, which is fine from a business perspective because I'm controlling it, I'm in charge of it. But from the individual perspective, the fact that you have that big blob and controlling it, that itself is might be a problem.
So I think early on you both mentioned, certainly you did, Kim, the threat modeling stuff they're working on. When I think of threats generally, yes, there might be insider threats where somebody's doing something malicious. But generally speaking, when we think of threats, it's some external force trying to gain access and probably sell information. certainly when we talk about privacy as part of security. But and this is kind of to my point earlier, when we're looking at privacy in the organization, we're trying to dance along that line of how much can we collect, how can we properly use it to the fullest extent that we're allowed to legally and ethically, maybe not ethically for some companies. And to me, those are threats as well, and not even intentional, but somebody, I guess to the point of this conversation, an engineer builds something that allows data to be accessed or used or something in a way that isn't in line with GDPR or some of the US state regulations, or I don't know, some of the other acts out of the EU that are coming along. I guess from a threat model perspective, because I think you're going to be talking about this in your training as well, what are some of the components of that activity, and does it touch on some of those things that I'm referring to?
You want to go first? Should I?
Sure, I don't mind, because there's one part of that I want to jump on. You mentioned ethics, and then you kind of backtracked that, but I absolutely think this is a big part of that as well. It's an odd situation where we're relying on the business to build a system that respects individuals' privacy from themselves, right? So that engineer might be giving themselves access, and that itself is already a problem. So it's absolutely an ethical situation. For me, the legal and the compliance and all that stuff, yes, it's important, it's there, but more of a stick to make sure you're doing the right thing, but that's not why you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So from a privacy threat modeling perspective, the organization or the system is often the misactor or threat source. And you just need to keep that into account when you do threat modeling for privacy, that you're not thinking of would this hurt the system or would this hurt the organization, but would this hurt the individual, and how does that impact it? And it's sometimes interesting to communicate that to the company, because you're basically pointing fingers. But it's kind of like an own goal. One of my privacy friends was calling it that way, and I think it makes it feel less finger pointy, but it's still the same story. But also about the third parties you share information with. That's also something that will have an effect, which from a security perspective in a way also does, but from a privacy perspective, it has more impact there to the individuals. Observers, people outside of the system that can still see some communication, that's also a potential threat source. So it's not just the hacker who gets into the system, it's all the stuff that's happening with the data, and that's going on around it. So it's broader than that. It needs a different mindset, basically. So you can definitely approach security and privacy together, but you need to be aware of that difference, because otherwise you will. I've done a lot of threat modeling sessions with mainly secure or people with a security background, and well, they first need to get the security threats out of their system, because otherwise they cannot make that mind set shift, because they are thinking about confidentiality and integrity, while from a privacy perspective we are looking at minimization and is that a good purpose to process that information, and so yeah.
Look, for security threat modeling, we always talk about the malicious admin, right? And we usually kind of stick a pin in that, because what are you going to do about that? And very often I'm teaching security threat modeling to a development team. I say, well, what do you do if a malicious developer does, pushes something to production? Or what if that guy gets fired, right? I always pick a friendly guy in the front of the room. What if that guy gets fired tomorrow? Well, what's going to happen? And in this case, we're kind of doing the same thing to the whole business. What if tomorrow the whole business, hypothetically, starts being hypothetically malicious about the data? They don't need to be intentionally malicious about it, but it's about building the privacy-respecting systems. Sorry, Kim, I stole that term. Privacy-respecting systems so that the individuals feel comfortable and they can be assured of the state that even if there's a new boss in the company, I'm kind of protected to some extent. Is that fair? Do you agree with that, Kim?
Yeah. Also, let's not forget, because you touched upon the legal a bit, you actually didn't. So I want to highlight that there's also a link there, because GDPR and other data protection compliance legislations require the privacy or data protection by design paradigm. So if you do this threat modeling, privacy engineering approach, well, you're doing what is expected, and if you do it properly, you can you can check that box off for your compliance people and make them rest assured that you thought it through, and that it was not just this 1 5-minute discussion you had with a lawyer, but it's actually embedded in the system rather than having it somewhere on paper where it's gonna fail.
Well, I never do what's expected of me, but I like thinking things through. No, it's true. Ask my mother.
I'm sure we could all say that, right? I think that's why many of us wear sometimes not the Irish hat, but the hacker hat. But let's. I want to. We only have a few minutes left here. I want to talk about the session that you're putting on. Clearly, a lot of security-minded engineers will be on site in Lisbon, and I suspect there'll be a lot of the folks sitting in your session as well. Who else do you want to be included in your training? Will you speak to privacy folks? Is it a good session for them to join? Threat and risk folks? I don't know. Tell me who you want in the room with you those days.
So this is one thing that we don't actually agree about. we agree, but we're focused in different places. Listen, having been that a security engineer who knows really well that stuff and thinks I know very well the other stuff, but didn't, I really want to help everybody else find that other stuff. There's a whole world of stuff, and I'm still learning. As we're doing this, I'm learning so much more. And there's a whole world of stuff, and it's a completely different perspective. And I want to bring more of that to security engineers and software engineers, software architects as well, right?
Yeah, well, in the privacy world, there's this growing skills gap for technical privacy, basically. Privacy engineering is still kind of a new domain. Well, it isn't really, but privacy in industry mainly got in there because of GRC. So it has a lot of legal background. So it often lacks that engineering skill. So I think that's something that we can help build. So I think privacy people can learn from security people like Avi, and I hope that together we can also bring that combined knowledge of security and privacy to the security engineers who basically want to extend their horizon and extend their skill set, because it shouldn't just be about that core security, but also privacy is something that will add value and can be easily integrated into what's already in the company.
Ultimately, we're not just talking about privacy by design. And it's not just threat modeling either, right? Yeah. That's one piece of it, but it's much larger than that. It's privacy by design and privacy engineering, but it's also how to combine that with security. So even a privacy engineer will learn how to combine that with security. And if you come from a security engineering background, that's fantastic, and you'll be able to integrate privacy with that.
And are there privacy engineering communities? There must be.
There are, but yeah, there are. There's this community within a larger privacy professionals community that focuses on privacy engineering. But I say it's still not really very present yet. I mean, there's plenty of people, but if you compare it to the overall privacy community, we're still in the minority usually. So this is again a great opportunity to to increase knowledge and awareness and get more people to really embrace that more technical approach to privacy. Because, well, in the end, we're not doing all this work. We don't want privacy to just be that checkbox compliance exercise, because what the goal of all those regulations are is making privacy respecting systems. And well, we need some technical background to be able to achieve that. So it's the combination of privacy and the technical part, the engineering part, and then integrating it with existing security practices that I think is a really great and useful and pretty unique twist to it, as far as I know. So.
Yeah, I love it. Hopefully we get some nice crossover here, and architects, engineers, security developers, a whole mix. And I mean, it really is a mindset, right, that we're talking about here, and taking the right actions for security and privacy together. So hopefully you fill the room, pack it out with lots of folks that will collaborate, and if I can say, put you both to the test. Right? Continuous learning. I was talking to Jim Manico earlier. He said while he's an instructor, he's always a constant student. He's always learning about something new. And I think it's all driven by what the business wants, right? Every time a new business idea comes up, we have to ask, well, how does that affect security and privacy? Both.
Exactly.
Well, good stuff. Your session is Practical Privacy by Design, Building Secure Apps that Respect Privacy. It's 2 days at OWASP AppSec Global in Lisbon. I really do hope you get a nice collection of folks and some good outcomes there. And I appreciate you sharing some insights with me today, Kim and Avi.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody in Lisbon in a few weeks. Please do stay tuned. Many more chats on the road here from ITSP Magazine, looking at the event up and down the stack, pun intended. All right. Thanks, everybody.